All right, folks, so in this video, I want to talk about that word Abbreviavit. But actually, first I want to sidestep a little bit and ask kind of why did they end up coming up with notation for rhythm in the first place? Because if you think about it, no one actually needs music notation. When we talked about the original music notation that was written down in Europe, it was for political reasons, not for musical reasons. They were perfectly happy with the music they were making. It was the Roman monks trying to get the Franks to learn their chants. And, you know, if your process is fine musically, you don't need to change it. You only change it when you run into a problem. So what problem did rhythmic modes and ligatures solve? Well, with the appearance of all these new polyphonic works and substitute clausula, you suddenly have way more music to remember. Originally, as the textbook mentions, polyphony was mainly used during solo sections of the chant. And where, you know, one part would just sustain and then the soloist could kind of do whatever. And this doesn't take a whole lot of coordination. It is not hard to imagine the soloist just cueing the choir to change notes and that they could do this on the fly without having set it up beforehand. You know, so now I'm the cantor and I'm and I'm just showing them like, all right, here we do it. But with these substitute clausula, you can't do this anymore. The rhythm is too complex. So everyone needs to be on the same page. They need to know beforehand what's going on in their part. And then one other thing that I mentioned in the last video is that these substitute clausula were collected in their own sections of the manuscripts they survive in, right? So they weren't printed in the middle of the chant during which they'd be sung. They'd be in the back. And it's kind of ridiculous to think of vocalists flipping back and forth in their books between the service. And then the last thing is that these books that I'm talking about that the music was collected in were like this big. They were like the size of the note cards that you get to use on the tests. They are almost impossible to read, right? So the conclusion from all of this is that these folks would have had all of these substitute clausula memorized. It's also worth noting at this point that the music composed by Leo wasn't written down during his lifetime. It comes from much, much later, maybe as much as 100 years after his lifetime. And the treatise on rhythmic modes also didn't appear during Leo's time. But there was a tradition already in place in medieval scholarship that helped with this, which was setting things you wanted to remember to rhythm. So Guido of Arezzo, our musical hero, had a book called Rhyming Rules, and he would sum up his teaching in little poems that have meter, that have rhythm. If you remember, the whole when between la, always sing fa that we talked about when we were talking about the rhythmic modes, that was one of Guido's Rhyming Rules, and we still do this. How do you remember how many days are in September, or April, or June, or November? It's a little poem. You know, and that's how we do it. So to go back to the word Abbreviavit, it could mean just abbreviated, right? But that doesn't make much sense because it's not like he shortened things that Leo did. It could also possibly mean edited, but there also isn't any real evidence of what we would think of as editing, like correcting errors or clarifying ambiguities. But Abbreviavit in Latin also just means wrote down. And this one seems like it's the most likely. The idea that Leo and the musicians of his generation started singing with rhythm as a memory aid to help them with all these substitute clausula. And then Pete and his generation were the ones who figured out how to notate this with the rhythmic modes and ligatures. And so Pete and company notated and wrote down the music of the previous generation that they had learned by ear. And then they took advantage of this new system of notation to write their own more complex music. So in the next video, we're going to talk about exactly who these smart folks were.